Well, hello everybody out there in YouTube land. I am back, and I'm sure all of you have been waiting with bated breath to hear from me once again and see what fresh new faces I brought to Roleplayer with 1,000 Faces. I am Matt Yancic. I am the founder and head game master here at Manufactured Myth and Legerdemain, and welcome to Roleplayer with 1,000 Faces. Each week, well, let me rewind on that. Every time I choose to stream, I try to bring you somebody cool that I've been listening to or watching. And this week, I'm pretty excited to actually be talking to someone that I have been listening or watching for probably 5 or 6 years at least now. So I'm with Lex Starwalker. I first started listening to Lex's podcast, GM Intrusions, about 1 million years ago when he was sort of focused. He was very Cypher and Numenera focused, and over the years, his podcast has kind of reinvented itself and changed, I would presume, with his numerous interests. Lex has been kind enough to come on the program to help me get my mojo back as I go into 2022 with my streaming. So Lex, this is not the Matt Yancic introduction show. This is all about you. Lex,
Oh
how
boy.
how are you tonight? How's it going?
I am fantastic. Very happy to be here and to get get back into this with you.
I appreciate it. I very much do. I've been it's been a low time for me as I move here in Boston, and it's been a little tough, but I'm trying to get things back, and I can't think of anyone better, particularly since I've been listening to you for so long. So for those people out there that don't know who you are, and if you don't know who Lex is, you better. I've put all of his content, links to it in the description below. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Well, anyone who does know who I am probably knows about me from my podcasts.
Hmm.
The longest running of which is Game Master's Journey, and before that was GM Intrusions. So they're very much gaming podcasts, but focus more on the GM. They're kind of chronicles of my journey as a GM and kind of trying to pass on what I've learned and still learn as a GM. I'm also a writer. I'm currently working on a science fiction novel, and that is what consumes me these days.
Hmm. Hmm.
But yeah, it's kind of interesting. I'm sure we'll talk about this later, but how much I'm still learning that there's a lot in common between game mastering and writing,
Hmm.
and I think that's probably why I like game mastering so much, because even when I'm playing, in a way, I'm practicing writing or skills relevant to
Yeah,
it.
I think it's really interesting that you say that. To be honest, there are so many times when I come away from a game. Actually, not so many times. It's almost every time I come away from a game and I think to myself, that was a really good first draft. I can't wait to improve
Yeah,
it tomorrow. And
yeah,
it's really interesting because then you're like, oh, wait a minute. Actually, I can't really go back.
yeah.
Um, well, one really cool thing about your podcasts and the shows that you've done in the past is how, I mean, you seem to have like this great affection, this great connection, this deep love for like science fiction and fantasy, for really getting into a lot of your shows would get into like world building. Like I'm thinking of, back to like Game Master's Journey and GM Intrusions and 300 something episodes.
Yeah.
Was there something that kind of did you have some big influences when you were younger that kind of steered you in this direction, or did you sort of find it on your own?
Well, for as long as I remember, I've always been into science and space and science fiction. As a little kid, I remember watching the original Star Trek and the Twilight Zone are the first shows I remember watching, really. Um, and growing up, I wanted to be an astronaut. That
Hmm.
was my childhood dream. And um, yeah, I think it was in probably high school, maybe even middle school, I started thinking that I wanted to be a writer. But back then, my thought, and it's kind of funny, my thought was always that I would be a writer when I retired. First, I would
Mm.
have a life of adventure
Right.
and whatnot, and see the world. And then when I was too old to do that anymore, then I would be a writer.
Yeah, because what are you
Um,
going to write about if you haven't had the adventures yet?
exactly, exactly. So as far as people that inspired me, first, probably just in general, would be scientists and astronauts. Have always been my heroes, like Samantha Cristoforetti, who was an Italian astronaut, who was, I don't know if you remember her. She was very much in the media when she was on the space station. And then Chris Hadfield, which other more people might know about because he's the guy that was often playing the acoustic guitar up there and made some fun YouTube videos about that.
Ladies and gentlemen, one thing I didn't neglected to mention about Lex's channel is that he does have some guitar performances mixed in there. They're like
Yeah,
they're
yeah, some bass guitar. Yeah.
yeah, they're like
Not great, not
the
great.
crunchy center at the center of the chocolate treat of the stream.
Yeah,
Um
if you want to hear what a new bass player sounds like, check it out.
Oh, you're far too modest. Far too modest. So then were you writing and role playing when you were younger, or were you looking, because if you're thinking about becoming an astronaut,
Yeah,
were you like doing like jumping jacks and push-ups and like learning how to fly, or what were you doing?
yeah. So the astronaut thing was kind of always a pipe dream. I never really thought about anything as far as like how would I make that happen until I was probably in high school. As far as writing, the first story I remember writing was in third grade. It, it was basically some fan fiction about Snoopy, and that I and this happened a few times in school where the teacher would give us some kind of writing assignment, and I would get going, and we'd be done, and I just started, I'm like, I have to finish the story, and that's how this was. I took it home and finished it. Um, but yeah, like anytime we'd have a writing assignment in school, I always liked it. My teachers always encouraged me um, to keep writing and told me I was a good writer. And Matt, I know we were just talking before the show that you're an English teacher, and I just want to give a shout out to English teachers because seriously, I would not be where I am today as a writer if it weren't for all my English teachers through school that encouraged me, because that's what made me think I could do it, at least in the beginning.
And
Was them saying you're good at this, you should do this more.
And something I want to say though about your podcasts is that I found them now. Lex has a lot of podcasts. I want to say
Yeah,
you have like 300 episodes, but I'm thinking you have 300 episodes of one particular podcast, and on top of that, you have others. But
yeah.
one thing I've always sort of appreciated about your podcasts is the amount of positivity in
Oh,
them,
thank you.
and the
Good to hear.
encouragement. Well, okay. The
I try
caveat,
to be positive, I
yes,
really do.
I think that but so I do know that every once in a while you say that you get up on your soapbox or whatever, and I was listening
Yeah,
actually to your most recent podcast where you're talking about confidence and egos and the differences therein and all of that. But what I find positive about it is that when you are on a soapbox, as you put it, it's more out of some sort of compulsion to tell people, why aren't we being more positive about this? Why aren't we being
yeah,
more encouraging about this? It sort of reminds me a little bit of for a while I was in another industry. I worked in film actually before I worked as a teacher, and I remember thinking, why is everyone so backstabbing here? All we do is sit around and make up cool stories all day. Like that's fun. Let's just have fun with it.
yeah.
So maybe again, that's something that might maybe drew me to your your particular podcast. Um, well then, so if you're writing about Snoopy, was Snoopy a major influence on you as a child, or
No,
did you have other? Was the World War I flying ace someone that you? I guess yeah, you can see them as a pilot or as an astronaut.
that was just because I had a Snoopy lunchbox, and
Okay.
so I had to write a story, and I was just looking around for an idea,
You
and
were
I saw my
desperate.
lunchbox. So, yeah.
So who were some of your influences then? Maybe from a fictional standpoint?
um. So let's see. So when I was young, I mean, I've always been a reader. From when I learned to read, I was always reading. I would read on the school bus to and from school. I got
Mm.
made fun of for it. I would read during class in school. In fact, one of my English teachers, Mr. Rehard, just in case he's listening, I always got in trouble in his class
Oh.
because I was reading books during English class instead of paying attention. I was reading a lot of Forgotten Realms and Dragonlance
Mm-hmm.
books in those days. I got into fantasy from The Hobbit. I think I read that in eighth grade.
Mm-hmm.
And then I read all the Lord of the Rings. And then that kind of, I guess I'm getting out of order. One of my favorite series as a kid was The Chronicles of Narnia,
Mm-hmm.
which is probably my first. Well, no, I remember really early. I remember in a class at school, our teacher would read to us every day, and she read us James and the Giant Peach, which
Oh.
is the first like specific book I really remember
Yeah.
loving.
Yeah.
And then I love the Narnia books. And then I discovered Tolkien, and that kind of brought me into fantasy. So then I started reading back then there used to be all these D&D
Yeah.
kind of tie-in novels, which there probably still are.
Yeah.
Um, then I got into Stephen King.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd say definitely in high school, and even still today, he's a big influence on me as a writer. My probably my favorite writer is Robert Jordan. The
Mm-hmm.
Wheel of Time
Mm-hmm.
series, I've read that entire series at least 5 or 6 times, which those books there, I think there's 14 or 15 of them,
Yeah,
and
there are
they're
quite a
all
few.
like 700 to 1,000 pages long. I mean, they're doorstops.
Yeah.
But it's great stuff. And then Brandon Sanderson
Yeah, I
is
was gonna
another one.
say. Yeah,
Uh, he
I,
has an excellent podcast that I've learned a lot from. Yeah.
yes, he does. It's like a 15-20 minute podcast
Yeah.
where
Writing
he's
excuses.
writing excuses. That's it. And
15 minutes long because you're in a hurry and we're not that smart.
right. Yes. Yes, he's another one who I actually listen to as well. And you know what? I might have
Yeah.
actually heard about his podcast maybe through listening to your podcast, or maybe it was recommended because of yours.
I
Um,
definitely recommend it often on
what
all my shows, I think.
what is it? What is it about? What was it about, say, Stephen King or Robert Jordan or Brandon Sanderson that particularly caught your eye, or what was unique about them that drew you to their work as opposed to Clive Barker or Storm Constantine or someone else around the same time that was doing something different?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if I had to guess, I'd say it's probably um I mean, definitely with Robert Jordan, I'd say it was his world that he'd created. It was so realized and in depth, and he had all these different cultures that were very unique, and his characters were very interesting. And for me, it's always been about where I'm reading something and I forget that I'm even reading a book. Like I
Yeah,
feel like I'm there, like
yeah,
in it. And I think those writers, and Stephen King's like that too. When
mm,
you read his stuff, it just kind of pulls you in.
yeah.
Um, but there's a lot of great stuff I've read. Like I really enjoyed the Deathgate cycle by
Uh-huh.
Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman. Love those books too.
I
But yeah,
I
I love a good story.
I was going to confess something and say I tried many times to read the Dragonlance books. I couldn't get into them. And then there was something about that first Dragon's Gate, the dragon. I think it's called Red Sea or something, or what's the first one? There was something about the cover that drew me in, and I thought, okay, I'll pick this up. I blew through the Dragon's Gate cycle. Like I love that, but I could
You
never
mean
get into
Deathgate?
Deathgate. I'm sorry. I
Yeah,
could.
I think it was Dragon Wing or Dragon's Wing was
That's
the first
right.
book, something like that.
Yes, yes, that's right. Um,
Yeah, that was a really cool series.
I liked it because they go down and they have like the entire city that's dead, or they have the spirits that are
Yeah,
kind of hanging off of the back
yeah, that
end of
was
them or
freaky.
something. Yeah, it was really interesting. I just remember really
Yeah,
liking it. And Hugh the Hand, I think, was the main
yeah,
character for that one, and I found
yeah,
him to be interesting. And I guess I never quite the first few of them I really liked, and then it was tough to get through all of them, but I did enjoy those more
yeah,
than Dragonlance, to be honest. Are
yeah.
you still reading a lot now, or do you find that now that you're writing, you're role playing, and you're working, you're moving, you're doing all these things, has your reading consumption level gone down at all, or are you still maintaining a healthy?
Well, it's funny. I did just move. Before I moved, it was actually up.
Mm.
I've been making a conscious effort to read more. I've listened to Stephen King's book on writing a lot, like
Hmm.
just over and over and over,
Hmm.
because he has a lot of good advice for writers in there. And he's a strong believer in you should be reading even more than you're writing. He's like, you should spend, 4 hours a day writing and 8 hours a day
Right.
reading or whatever. So I really took that to heart, and there's just so many books to read. But yeah, the last, I don't know, month or so since the move, I haven't been reading much, but I have a whole stack of books that I want to get to. So I usually I read a lot.
Mm. What then got you into RPGs? Was it a natural progression from those books that you were picking up as a youth, or was there something else, or?
Yeah, I think so. I started with D&D in high school, and yeah, that was when I was really into fantasy. I was reading all the D&D books, and I didn't really know anything about Dungeons and Dragons as a game. And then the way our high school worked is we had two different middle schools
Hmm.
that came together into one high school.
Mm.
So my freshman year of high school, I made a bunch of new friends from this other middle school that I hadn't known before, and some of them were in these fantasy books like I was,
Mm.
and they also played D&D and had been for years. So they introduced me to it, and I started playing with them. But you probably remember, or well, I don't know. Do you teach high school? Is that
I
what you do?
I
Yeah.
occasionally teach high school. Right now, I'm
Okay.
currently teaching elementary school, but.
Okay. Well, you probably remember high school can be very cliquish.
Mm.
And so, though I was friends with these guys, they already kind of had their established campaigns with their established groups. So I
Right.
was having a hard time getting chances to play,
Yeah.
and they were just too cool for me. Some of them were upperclassmen. So I, having probably only played D&D maybe 2 or 3 times, I started being the dungeon master just so I could play,
Mm.
and brought in a bunch of kids
Interesting.
my age who'd
Yeah.
never played before and said,
Yeah.
"Hey, you guys should play this game with me." And that actually might be part of the genesis of my podcast, because from the very beginning as a GM, as I was still figuring out how to do it myself, I was mostly GMing for players who'd never played before. So I was also teaching them how to play. So I've kind of from the beginning been kind of a teacher
Mm.
as a game master. And honestly, I like it that way. I've through history, my best players tend to be ones who've never played before,
Mm.
and I'm their first GM, and I don't know why that is, but that's less the case now as an adult. But when I was younger, that was, my best players were always people that I found who'd never played before, and I taught them how to play, and they got really into it. Um,
How were you
yeah,
with I think we're around a similar age, and what you're describing sounds like a very similar kind of experience to what I had, except and what's funny is that you mentioned picking up the books and then figuring out how to GM even as you're trying to teach your players how to play. Um, was it easier for you to kind of I remember having trouble grasping the concept. I didn't quite get the concept when I was a kid because I was coming from thinking it was a lot like a board game. And I
okay,
think like I started playing with that the Marvel superheroes like yellow box set. I think that was one of my first RPGs ever. And I remember they came with like maps, and so I was always trying to move things around. Um, how quickly do you think, and I'm not even sure if this is a good question, but how quickly do you think you were to sort of understand? But I'll ask it anyway, because the standards on this channel are so low. So how quickly do you think you were to sort of pick up the concept of this, like this idea of role playing? You were going back and forth and sort of creating a story, but then having adventures and mixing it in with and balancing it with combat. Is that something that you felt came naturally to you, or did it take you a while to figure it out? Or
it it seems like it came pretty natural to me. I think that's because of how I grew up. I grew up on a farm in the country.
mm-hmm,
My only playmate was my sister
mm-hmm,
until I was in school. And I remember, like, for instance, in middle school, after school, most of my friends lived in town. They'd go over to each other's houses. They'd watch cable. They'd watch horror
cable.
movies, all this stuff. We didn't have cable.
Yes,
Um,
I feel your pain.
I spent most of my childhood by myself with my dogs out in the woods, um, playing make believe and pretending I was on an alien planet or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. Um, and even as an older kid, probably older than, when most other kids had gone on to other things like playing Nintendo, I was still doing that because I didn't have a Nintendo. And so I think for me, I did a lot more of that, and I did it
Yeah,
at an older age.
yeah.
So to me, I mean, that playing a role-playing game, that's kind of what it is. It's just that with some rules and structure. Um, but it's very similar to the stuff I used to do just to entertain myself as a kid,
So then
only
I
with other people.
right, and you're kind of in control. I mean, it sounds like from what you're saying that was sort of a natural fit for you. So can I
Yeah.
assume, I mean, based on all of your podcasts, everything I've listened to, you feel that you're like basically a forever GM? And
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say if I could see the amount of time I've played RPGs in my life, I'd guess that 90% or more of that time was GMing. Because I told you how I got started, and then once I kind of knew what I was doing and I was willing to GM, none of my friends ever wanted to. In high
right,
school, no one ever wanted to GM. It was always like almost like 1, 2, 3, not it, like who's going to be the GM.
right.
But I wanted to. I
Yeah,
enjoyed
yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah.
So I was the one person in my group of friends who actually wanted to do it. So I pretty much always GM'd. I had one friend who every once in a while he'd decide he wanted to start a campaign. He'd run like 2 or 3 sessions, and then he didn't want to do it anymore. And I was running, every week. And
Yeah.
when I went to college, I was coming back, on breaks to run for the same guys. And I was running at college, and college was kind of the same thing. I mean, there were more people that were willing to GM, but it was still when you had someone that was like, they wanted to,
Right.
even the people that were willing to, a lot of times were like, oh no, Lex can GM. He
Hmm.
wants to do it. I'd
Hmm.
rather play.
Hmm.
Um, and so for a long time, it was kind of a necessity thing. But now these days, I prefer it. I do enjoy playing sometimes with a good GM. I am a bit picky, I think,
No,
with my
I
GMs.
I would say no. I think there's nothing wrong with that. You laugh about that, but I mean it's very interesting. Like as a if you're a forever GM and if you enjoy GMing and you've spent years GMing, you have a certain way of doing things, but I think you can also appreciate how other GMs do things. And if
Mhm.
if you feel that they're doing something that meets your standards, then great. But if there's someone there that's sort of falling flat all the time, you obviously wouldn't want to continue on. And I guess by falling flat, I don't necessarily mean doing it a different way. I mean
Right.
not fulfilling their obligations, like some of the most
Yeah.
simple things, like prepping in advance, or having a story
Right.
going, or running combat in a fair, or just being fair at the table.
Yeah.
Um, what do you think it is that attracts you to GMing and as a teacher, I'm gonna do something to you that I do to my students just to make sure you're positive. Tell me what is the good stuff that you do as a GM? What do you think you do so well that makes other people just say, "Oh, let's have Lex do it."
Well, I think you already mentioned the big one, which I might have forgotten, so I'm glad you said it, which is being fair. I think as a GM, in my mind, that's the number one uh, important thing to do. And sometimes GMs are unfair because they genuinely like a certain player better than the others, or they dislike a player, or more often they like a certain character better. And
Yeah.
I know I've done that myself, where just someone makes this amazing character that I just have so many ideas for, and it's very easy to get focused on that one character.
Right.
But I think a lot of times it's unintentional. A lot of times unfairness comes about through not understanding the rules, because game designers try very hard to make the rules fair. So for instance, use D&D, the wizards have a lot of things going for them that could make them outclass a fighter. So there are things in the game to kind of balance that. And sometimes as a GM, if you don't understand all that, you can actually be very unfair, because maybe the things that limit the wizard, you're like, oh, I'm house ruling that stuff away. And so it makes it unfair in that way.
Yeah.
So I think fairness is really important. And the other thing I think is really important, and these are the two things that will make me not like a GM too, by
Mm-hmm.
the way,
Mm-hmm.
is the illusion of freedom. And it is usually an illusion, but as a player, I want to feel like my character can go anywhere, do anything, say anything I want, and the GM can handle it and they'll let me do it. There's not going to be any of the, no, you can't do that, or some uber powerful NPC shows up to stop me from doing the thing I
Right.
want to do.
Right.
Um, so as a GM, I believe in letting players do whatever they want to do, but I also believe in consequences. And this wouldn't make me like quit a GM's game or something, but one thing that does kind of bother me that I see GMs do sometimes is where they let players get away with too much. Like they'll come up to a solution to a problem that doesn't make any sense,
Yeah.
or they'll talk off or mouth off to an NPC they really shouldn't, who really shouldn't put up with it, but for some reason they do,
Yeah.
things like that. So I think it's really important to let your players do whatever they want, but also let them enjoy the consequences, good or bad, of what they do, and to not not put the kid gloves on
Yeah.
and pamper them if they make stupid decisions.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
as a player, I like that too. Like I've definitely had times where I did something and I was kind of waiting for the hammer to come down,
Mm-hmm.
and it never did. And even though it would have been bad for my character, I kind of wanted it to, because I'm like, I should I just mouthed off to this official who
Right.
who doesn't have to take it, and there should be a consequence, and there wasn't. And that's kind of uh it can break the immersion. It's kind of a bummer.
I sort of agree. And what's funny is one thing I really like about GMing is I will, I'll write out a bunch of ideas that I have for maybe how the story's going to go. But the truth is, at the end of those 4 hours, I sit down and because I record a lot of my sessions audioly just so that I can listen to them and like in the car and I think about them. Um, and I just start checking boxes off. Oh, this is what's going to happen next session because they did that and they did that. And now that they did that, something's going to happen over here. And that little fire that they started, well, guess what? The smoke was up in the air and it attracted like a band of so and so's that were, rolling by in wagons. And now they're going to descend on the town. So I feel like those consequences, like you're saying, I think they're really important to a game. And I feel like when you don't have them, just like you said, it sort of breaks the illusion and it feels like, wait a minute. Um, so what
And
would,
the
oh,
players will love that too, I
yes.
think. And it's amazing when those consequences come up and maybe the players have forgotten about them. That's what I love to do is I'll wait, so maybe the consequence doesn't happen right away or even the
Mm,
next session, but
mm,
a few weeks down the road, then it comes back to bite them and they're like, oh crap, Lex remembered when we did that, and the NPC remembered, and now we're paying for it. And even when it's a quote negative thing, players love that. They really love it, because it makes it feel like what they do matters. It has
yes.
impacts on the world.
Yes. Yes, I completely agree. And I think that that's a great way to sort of generate keep your story sort of rolling along, and it also I think makes the players feel like they're sort of writing the story too. in
Yeah.
a way, like, and that thing that you mentioned about the illusion of freedom and the illusion of choice and the illusion, like, I think that's like really important for the game. Um, well then, how do you prep for your games? I know that you have exhaustive hours of discussion on how you on how much you prep and you enjoy it, and but can you boil it down to a few minutes and tell
Yeah.
us what you
Well, I'm
do?
definitely not one of those GMs that just shows up and wings it.
Mhm.
I'm very much a believer in the, and I don't know who said this first, but the prepare to improvise
Mhm.
school of thought. So my prep tends to focus on the setting and the NPCs, just knowing, where the player characters are, knowing the NPCs that are around really well, so that when they during the game, when they do things, I can react and kind of be thinking about, okay, what are the consequences of this thing they did going to be. Um, as far as preparing a story, I try to just prepare for the given session I'm getting ready to run. I try not to go out any further than that, because after all these years, I still can't predict what players will do.
Mm.
And usually when I try, I'm wrong. So at the end of the session, it's usually going a different direction than I would have thought beforehand anyway. So I found that preparing more than 1 or 2 sessions out, I end up having to redo it anyway. Um, so yeah, I guess preparing to improvise, just knowing my NPCs really well. If, like, for instance, if they're doing a dungeon, knowing like the areas around where they are that they might go
Mhm.
to, knowing
Yeah.
things like that really well. I make a lot of like notes and bullet lists and things like note cards and things like that to help me during the game. I'll bookmark rules or whatever. So I really do that kind of stuff. Um, and it depends on the game. When I run D&D, I find myself preparing encounters a lot, which I don't so much care for. So I run less and less D&D as things go.
Well, I know you've
Um,
mentioned in your podcast that recently you've gotten, I guess, if I'm, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you've gotten back into Numenera as of late. Is
yeah,
that
I've been
true or?
running some Numenera, and now it looks like I might be getting back into World of Darkness after a long, long
Oh, wow.
hiatus from those games, but I had forgotten how much I love them.
Yeah, well, it's really hard. Like I look over at my shelf and there are so like it's a cliche, but there are so many games and it's there's no
Yeah,
time to run them all. Um,
yeah.
do you do session zeros? Do you sit down with your players beforehand and kind of talk to them about maybe what sort of characters they're creating, or do they sort of come to your table and they say, "Here's who I've made up"? How does that usually work with your games?
Yeah, I love doing a session zero. It depends on the game. Like if it's D&D and everybody's played D&D a lot before, I'm fine with just kind of giving them, here's in general what I'm thinking about running, and they just show up with characters and we go. But I I think my style as a GM is very much shaped by the old World of Darkness games, especially Vampire the Masquerade and Changeling the Dreaming. I really internalized how they approach game mastering, or as they call it, storytelling,
Mm.
where you're thinking in scenes instead of
Mm.
encounters, and it's more focused on the drama and less on just combat and stuff like that. And they were all about what they called a prelude. So, for instance, in Vampire, you would run a prelude with each character that
Mm.
was like a little mini session just for them,
Mm.
that sort of explained how they became a vampire.
Yeah.
And the thing I loved about those games, for instance, Vampire, is with a beginning character right out of the gate, you had all this stuff you could role play because you'd done this prelude that established, here's what you were like as a normal human, and then these things
Mm.
happen to you. Now you're a vampire in this new world, and it gave you like all this stuff to work with on session one, as far as your character has all this conflict because they were human, now they're not,
Mm.
and they have the whole humanity mechanic where as you do more and more evil things, you kind of lose your
Yes.
human soul or
Yes.
whatever. Um, so yeah, that really kind of indoctrinated me to the prelude slash session zero. So my last kind of big D&D campaign I ran, my Primordia campaign, I actually did that. I got together with each character, each player, and did a little thing just for them. And it was more than just making their character. It was an actual little, we kind of
Right.
built up their backstory and
Right.
stuff. And that was a lot of fun. I really like doing it that way.
One of the things I have to say as a viewer of not all of your stuff, I feel like it's just impossible to watch everybody's stuff
Yeah,
as much as I
there's
want
too
to,
much.
and there's way too much. But one of the things I enjoyed about I think it was the last campaign you streamed, were your vignettes.
Yeah, yeah,
And I really liked, and I have to say, if my players are watching, I swear I didn't steal it from him, but actually I did. I've been doing what I call interludes,
yeah, yeah,
which are essentially I will take advantage of times when half the players can't make it, and I'll say, okay, well instead of that, why don't we just say that you guys break up for a week or so, and let's go off and we'll do separate things. I've enjoyed watching your vignettes. Did those come out of the ideas that you or out of the World of Darkness preludes ideas, or was that something that just sort of popped into your head, or did you get that from somewhere else?
yeah. Yeah, it probably did. And we did these preludes with everybody. And so because we did that,
Mm,
um, each of those characters, not only were they more developed from like the player's point of view, but I was kind of more in on
yeah.
their backstory and stuff like that. So we had a pretty, I don't remember now if it was 4 or 5 or 6 players, but we had a good number of players, and we were playing online.
Mm,
And so it's just really impossible to do much with the individual characters. So I think how it started was we were going to have a week where not everybody could make it.
mm,
And I thought, well, hey, there are all these kind of little threads with your individual characters that I know we're not going to get to as a group. So why don't we do little sessions individually where we can kind of develop
mm.
stuff going on with like your character's family or their
Yeah.
friends or things that aren't part of what the group's doing. And yeah, we had a lot of fun with it. And I don't
I
know, I guess if you're a GM looking for ideas, especially if you do routinely have like someone can't make it
Oh, you may have frozen slightly, Lex.
to,
Oh, there we go.
oh, did
You're
you lose me?
just for a moment. You were about to
Okay.
say, I think one of the most brilliant ideas you can do is. So you said, I guess you were saying that I guess if you're looking for something to do, it might be a good idea. I think I know where you were going with it.
Yeah,
Um,
just doing these vignettes with if you have only one player that can play a certain week, do something with their character. And you can, even if you're in a situation where they're all together and you can't say, oh, character A goes off by themselves and does something, you could do like a flashback
yeah,
and do something from their past or
yeah,
something like that.
yeah. I think that's a great bit. And for those of you that haven't watched any of Lex's streams, you should probably check out his last one and take a look. You had done quite a few of them. I remember there were a lot of little
Yeah,
ones in there. And what I appreciated and the idea that I sort of ran with in my own campaigns was this idea that it's almost like building a character, fleshing out a character from multiple different angles, so that then when you place that character back in the big group story, suddenly everything that the character did took on like an extra dimension, because there
yeah,
was a dimension that everyone got, and the GM got from them together with the group, but then there's a dimension that the player is getting out of it and the GM's getting out of it because they can see the character from a new angle. And I
yeah,
felt like it really helped your players, or helped just in general, help the players to kind of flesh out who they were, and also breathe life into the role playing, because at certain points they had to sort of explain to each other what actually happened. And how many
Hmm.
times have you been in a session where you split up, but everybody's listening to what's going on?
Right.
So then you have to
Yeah.
pretend to role play out, or pretend to say, or you just say, oh, well, I tell them everything that happened. This really brought in that added dimension of like role playing within role playing, because they had to like explain what was going on with other characters and other adventures that the other players had not been anything a part of. So it really
Yeah.
was, adding another dimension.
It's also a great way to handle the whole split the party thing,
Hmm.
because some of the vignettes were not solo.
Yes.
Because as we played, some of the characters kind of developed friendships. Like these two characters really kind of hit it off, and those two characters kind of hit it off. So then I started doing vignettes for like those two players
Hmm.
together.
Hmm.
And so that's a way, if something's coming up where you want to divide the party up, instead of trying to run that in one session where half the time, half the people are sitting there
Yeah.
bored,
Yeah.
you can run two separate sessions for the two separate groups and then bring everybody together again. And yeah, like you said, when I did that, there were times that I gave information
Hmm.
to one group and gave different information to the other group, and they had to come together and compare notes. And sometimes things got lost in
Yes.
that, and
Yes.
they remembered later, oh yeah, we never told you about this thing that happened. And it was great because the players didn't actually know, because they weren't there listening when it happened.
You had mentioned, just to shift gears here slightly now, you had mentioned that you had been playing online. Uh, how has it been the last few years of COVID? Do you think, I mean, have you been playing in person at all, or have you been working predominantly running predominantly in Zoom?
Yeah, I've been playing pretty much completely online for years, like even way before COVID, just because I've moved around the country a lot. So I haven't always known people in my immediate area to play. And I've made a lot of friends online and in different places. And, putting out an RPG podcast, anytime I needed players, I could just say, hey, I'm looking for players, and
Yeah.
they'd show up. So, I mean, I definitely prefer playing in person. I love rolling physical dice, to the point that usually, even when I play online, we all a lot of times just roll physical dice and tell each other what we
Yeah.
rolled.
Right.
Um, but that said, I've gotten used to playing online, and it has a lot of advantages,
This is where I
honestly.
was this is where I was going to go with this question. I was going to sort of
Yeah.
tie back into what you've just been talking about. So like the idea of the vignettes, um, I mean, I was sort of thinking about that. In the old-fashioned days, you'd have to sort of say, "Hey, Frank, why don't you come over on Wednesday, or I'll come over on
Yeah.
Wednesday and we'll play." It's so much easier for you to just sort of send a quick Facebook message or email and just say, "Hey, Frank, what about? I've been thinking about this vignette idea. Why don't you show up 7 p.m. Monday?" Do you think that? Well, it had. Let me ask you, what are the advantages that you see to Zoom and playing online?
You don't have to leave the house. You don't have to wear pants. Um,
Here's to not wearing pants.
yeah. If you're the host, you don't have to have a bunch of people over and mess up your house.
Yes.
Uh, you don't have to, yeah, commute, all that's great. Um, you have depending where you live, you have a much larger pool of players to choose from, especially if maybe you work weird hours, like you work third shift or something. You can find players from another part of the world
Hmm.
where that time works great for them. Um, but yeah, I'd say that's the biggest advantage, is you just have so many more players. You can be more choosy about the players that you have. You can get more diverse players. It's also great, if you're, maybe you start playing, and I know people that are like this, where you start playing like maybe when you're in high school, and then everybody moves to different states or even countries. You can still game together on the regular, and not just like on Christmas or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, I mean, really, the only downside that I've found is the whole crosstalk thing, where when you're in a room together, you can have two different conversations going at once, and you can kind of listen to both.
Yeah.
But online, the at least so far, the software can't handle that. It'll
Yeah.
pick one person, give them the floor, and you don't hear what the other person's saying. But that's it.
Yeah, I sort of feel it's funny that those things that you just listed are all of the things that I've gone through in the last couple or 3 years since everybody has hopped online. I've been
Yeah.
playing with people in South Africa.
Oh,
I
nice.
never like it was from I did Gen Con like a couple of years ago, and I just ran like 4 games, and people that would never have flown in to Gen Con, or I would never have flown to Gen Con, I just suddenly I would show up and they'd be in my room and we'd run a game and we'd exchange emails like at the end and say, hey, we got to play again. I have been playing with friends from high school that I have not played with in decades. We all kind of got back together. Um, and yeah, you're right though. I do miss like the crosstalk. I kind of feel like Zoom has a way of sort of sorting people in a good way for communicating, but it also kind of quells a little bit of like the funner or the stuff that's like the kind of ad-libbed goofiness that you might sort of see normally in a game. Um, how about any Roll20, any virtual tabletops that come into your play now, or are you just straight theater of the mind? Do you miss minis? Were you ever playing with minis at all?
I've never actually, I never really played with minis in the early days. During the time of fourth edition,
Mm-hmm.
I was playing some Pathfinder, and I did some mini. That's really no. I take it back. Third edition, I started using minis a little bit. So that was when I first played with minis, as far as like in person. And then Pathfinder. If I run D&D, I use Roll20 and I use the virtual tabletop. Um, but as far as like other games, I avoid it whenever I can. I would much rather do theater of the mind.
Mm.
I would much rather not have a virtual tabletop. So if I don't need it, I don't use it. Like right now, I'm running a Numenera game and we
Mhm.
just play on Discord.
Oh, so
We have
is
video
now.
chat.
Oh, okay. So you do have video because Discord just added video relatively recently. Is that right? Or weren't they always
Um,
just audio?
I think it's been a year or more that it's had
Ah,
video
okay.
now, but yeah, it actually has really good
That's
video.
relative to me when you reach this age.
Yeah. But yeah, their video is really good, and you have text chat along with that, which is nice. And then I use like Google Drive to share documents and images and stuff like that. But um, yeah, I don't have anything against miniatures per se,
Mhm.
but the virtual tabletop just takes a lot of time to set up and to
Yeah.
make all the tokens and everything else. And I do find, and this could just be me as a GM. I'm not saying this is a fault of miniatures, but when I run a game like D&D with miniatures, I tend to get caught up in the tactical kind of wargaming aspect of it,
Yeah.
and it kind of carries me away. And
Yeah.
I prefer to focus more on the story and the drama and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Yeah. I think that's something that turns me off, at least about the current state of virtual tabletops. I mean, I remember when I first sat down a couple of years ago to put a tabletop together for a game I was running. I must have spent like a 40-hour work week putting it together and then 15 minutes on the story. And I'm sure
Yeah,
there's a learning curve, I'm sure. But I just sort of felt like, my goodness, we're getting away from all the good, at least from my approach and my style and my players and that game that we were running. We're getting away from the good stuff that we really wanted to
yeah.
get into. Um,
Now I should give a caveat. I did use the virtual tabletop a lot with D&D recently, partly because I was streaming. And I think, and I mean, this is just my opinion, but I thought that it was better for the stream because people have something to look at.
Yeah.
They can see the map or whatever. So I did do it more with that than maybe I would have otherwise. But yeah, that's another, I guess, downside of playing online is just the, especially with a new group, there's like the half hour of getting everybody's mic and camera to work.
Yeah.
And you add in the virtual tabletop and it's just more of that, because then you have all this stuff with that to get to work for everybody and get their sheets to work and everything else. So yeah, I avoid it when I can.
Yeah, it does become a production. I know exactly what you're talking about. I think it would.
Yeah.
I think with time everything gets easier, but the problem is,
Yeah.
you know, when you're role playing, and I'm not sure what your experience has been. I have good friends that are genuinely want to show up and role play, but they don't have even a minute to maybe focus on their character during the week. So when they show up, they take 10 or 15 minutes to review what happened last time and they're like, "Oh yeah," and then they're 100% on. But I couldn't
Yeah.
imagine them also, in addition to that, building these virtual character sheets and having some sort
Yeah.
of input over their tokens and over all that stuff. So
Yeah.
it sort of creates a barrier. Do you think is there anything you feel like you've sort of learned from the relatively recent move to online play, or do you think you become a better GM or better storyteller, maybe from online experiences, or vice versa? Like, is there something you take from real play and bring into your virtual tabletop to interpret in a certain way? Do you think it
Hmm.
changed or evolved at all?
I don't know. I'm kind of stumped on that one.
Ladies and
I feel
gentlemen,
like
I've just made my guest uncomfortable. Let's go to the
no,
next
no,
question.
I feel like the answer is no, at least not that I can think of.
You know what
Um,
the reason I asked this is because a long time ago, Lex Starwalker taught me something about
uh-oh.
how to be a better how to be a better GM.
And
You
now I've
said,
completely gone against it. Is that where this is going?
"No, I've caught you." This is where the 60 Minutes crew breaks into your room and sits you down with a white light and just says, "Lex, you're a liar. Let's talk about this." No, I was going to say the thing that actually I learned that, and it was a very simple thing, and it was something you mentioned, and it wasn't until you mentioned it that I started doing it. You said one of the better ways, or probably one of the best ways to improve your performance as a game master is just to record yourself.
Oh,
And I
yes.
think that probably goes back about 157 years when you said that. But I remember thinking
Yeah.
about that, and I'm like, oh yeah, how could I have been so silly? Like, as a teacher, there are so many times when I had recommended to a student, record the way you read the speech. Record your performance, your dance performance. Record whatever you're doing, and then play it back, and do it in front of the mirror and watch yourself. Uh, and you know what? You're so right. And I assume that that might be something that you know I think we can all use if we're up for it. But
Yeah.
some people are more self-conscious maybe than others. But for me,
It is hard to listen to yourself. So I will warn you, if you're trying this, it'll probably take like 4 hours before you're beyond the point of I can't stand the sound of my own voice, because it sounds different than from inside your own head. So that's something that anybody that podcasts or does anything like that or streaming, you just have to get used to it. And then you get to the point you don't notice it anymore. But yeah, I discovered that totally by accident because I was doing an actual play. And for the first time, I was running games and then I was editing the game. So I'm listening to myself run the game. And I mean, it's been so long, I don't remember what insights I gained from that, but I do remember that I learned a lot. Things that I was not doing nearly as well as I thought I was, but
mhm,
also things that I was doing really well that I had no idea that that was even like something
right,
I was good at.
right.
And that was really, it wasn't even the, oh, I'm not nearly as good at a Scottish accent as I thought I was. It wasn't really so much that, it was realizing kind of where my strengths were. And um, a lot of that was from also hearing the reactions of the players, because when you're running the game, you're so focused on what you're doing, the like what the players are doing and saying, it's kind of going in one ear and out the other, and you're paying attention with half a mind, but you're also thinking about the next thing you're going to do and what the NPC is going to do. And so when you listen to it later, there are times where like the players were obviously having a ball that I didn't even realize it at the time, or they really liked an NPC or something like that, that I didn't even catch it during the game. So yeah, I highly recommend that. Chances are good you'll find some things that you're actually really good at that you didn't even realize that you can kind of lean into more. Because like me, I can't do accents. I can't do, I'm not Matt Mercer. I can't do cool voices. So I don't even try, unless I want to do comedy. But that's only one skill of so many skills that you can use as a GM. So yeah, that's great advice that I gave and then forgot.
And he's modest, folks.
Tell my wife that, will you? She won't believe
Sure,
it.
absolutely. Now this kind of I'm going to tie back to something else we were talking about before, and that was the idea that like you feel like you're writing a first draft whenever you're sitting down to play a game, and at the end of the 4 hours. I know, of course, that I mentioned earlier on in the program that Lex's podcast. I'm not sure if it's fair to say it's morphed or you have multiple podcasts that you're juggling, because I know you went back to Game Master's Journey just recently, but you're also doing Lex Out Loud. So you're writing novels as well. And I mean, to me, like looking at you and your work, I mean, you feel very much like a communicator and a storyteller to me. The when did you start writing, and was it tied at all to the RPGs, or was it the Snoopy story if we go all the way back? What do you think? What was your first moment when you felt like, you know what, this is what I am? I'm a writer.
Yeah, well, there's a story behind that,
Oh.
actually. So I had, I wrote some, like, I guess what would be short stories through school. And then in college, I took some creative writing classes and fiction writing classes, and, wrote some more short stories, wrote one thing that would, I guess, be a novella,
Yeah.
but it was basically fan fiction. So my first novel actually came about because of some crappy players. So I was
Who shall remain nameless, I
yes,
assume?
no, I
Okay.
won't name any names.
Okay.
I'm sure they'll know who they are, but and this could be a very long story. I'll give you the quick and dirty version. I was going through a rough time in my life, we'll just say that, and looking for escape from my harsh reality.
Mm.
And I don't remember how I got the idea, but I'd been running a lot of Changeling, and I wanted to go back to Vampire. And I'd always wanted to run like this, like super political, like vampire game. Like I just wanted to do Vampire to the nines.
Mm.
So I was house sitting for my sister in another town where I didn't know anybody. I was really depressed and alcoholic and all this stuff, and wanting to escape from my reality. So, and had nothing to do, no one to talk to. So, and it was winter. So
Wow,
literally,
I'm getting depressed now.
yeah, literally, other than walking my sister's dog a few times a day, all I did all day, every day for, I think it was like 2 weeks, was work on this vampire campaign. And it was set in Chicago. I did a ridiculous amount of research into the city of Chicago and the geography and all this stuff. I made all these really detailed NPCs, all the vampire elders, and how, who was going to backstab who and all this stuff. And I came up with this elaborate campaign that I was going to run for some friends back home. And then both of my players that I had that were like the two players I could count on, and I was going to find some more, just quit. I went down to run the first game, and they were like, yeah, we don't want to play, and never did get a reason. So they quit my game. They dumped me as a friend and a GM.
Oh,
And
oh,
I was so mad and
yeah,
upset about that because I'd poured so much into this campaign. I had just stacks of
yeah,
notes and all this
yeah,
stuff.
yeah,
Um, I said a lot of bad words. And I was like, the problem with this hobby, and this might be the moment where I'm a little negative. The problem with this as a hobby is that you are relying on other people. If you're the GM and you're making this adventure, you need players,
yeah,
or else it's kind of pointless.
yeah.
And I was just so upset, and I was kind of in a bad place anyway. I mean, the obvious answer is go find other players, but I was just so upset that didn't seem like an obvious answer to me.
Right.
I didn't want to do that. I was like, I'm done with role-playing
May I
games.
ask when this was?
As far
Like
as like the year,
5,
or
10, 20 years ago?
this was about 13 years ago.
Okay. All right. So
Yeah.
before, in other words, Zooming was a regular thing. So,
Yeah, no, there was no
yeah,
video conferencing
yeah,
back then. Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know how long I was just furious about that, but I'm very much someone who, when life hands me lemons, I want to make
yeah,
lemonade kind of
yeah,
person.
yeah,
And I've been saying my whole life I wanted to write a novel. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to take all this crap I came
yeah.
up with, and I'm going to write a novel based on it. And that is something that is just me. I am the only one that can finish or not finish this novel. It
Yes,
doesn't depend on anyone else.
yes.
And so that's what I did. And that was my first novel I wrote, Dawn of Endless Night. And it was totally Vampire the Masquerade fan
Mm-hmm.
fiction. Basically, it
Mm-hmm.
was very much based on the campaign I was creating, and I just wrote it as a novel instead.
How much of that, this is actually really interesting because I'm always interested in the connection. So I see role playing as basically ad-libbed storytelling. Like
Mhm.
it's like a it's a group effort. It's all about like just sort of keeping the ball rolling and all of that. Sometimes the ball slows down a bit, sometimes it really you fire it off and it goes really well. Um, and here you are with a stack of material that you've created to research for essentially like it's kind of like a sandbox in a way. I would assume.
Mhm.
I mean, I can
Yeah.
understand. I'm sure you probably have a basic kind of idea of an outline of maybe how the story is going to progress and what's going to happen. But it is basically it's a sandbox because then you drop the players inside of it and they start to bump around in there and they sort of
Yeah.
add their thing to the story. How much how much did you keep? How much did you throw out? How helpful was it for you to sort of think through scenarios of what maybe the players are going to go through, or how helpful was your prep to run a game when it came to sitting down to write the book?
It was actually really, really helpful because I had basically all my world building was done. I knew everything about the setting I needed to know. I had all my characters. Um, the only character I didn't have was the main character, because that would have been the player
Yeah,
characters. So I actually, for that character, I used a character I had played in Vampire years ago. Was a character I made that I really liked, and I didn't get to play it that much. So I just kind of made him the main character. Um, and yeah, that was the beginning of my realization, which continues, of how much writing and GMing can be the same if you approach both of them the way I approach them, because there's
hmm
different approaches to all of them. But yeah, all of that was directly relevant. I mean, I pretty much just sat down and wrote an outline for the book and then started writing the book. I mean, there was basically all the prep was already done at that point.
right. Like all the stuff you wanted to research, all the stuff,
Yeah.
the settings, the scenarios, and things like that. You just sort of had to string them
So
together.
I guess I should say, because there's different approaches you can take as a GM and as a writer. And as both through the years, I've experimented with different things and tried different things. But kind of where I've landed is as a GM, and we kind of talked about this a little bit, is I try to, as far as my prep, I try to
Mm.
build a good setting and good NPCs for the player characters to bounce off of. And then I will come up with like a situation or a scenario to put them in, or a problem for them to deal with. But that's kind of where I stop. I don't so much come up with, well, first they're going to do this and then they're going to do that, because I don't know what they're going to do.
Yeah.
And if I try to predict, I'll be wrong. And also then you can kind of want to railroad them into what you thought they would do. So I don't necessarily come up with an ending. I might have an idea of, oh, I think this is probably the way it'll go, or this is kind of where I hope it'll end up. But I just come up with the beginning situation and what they sometimes call the inciting incident that kind of gets things going, and then see where the players take it. And now my book, Dawn of Endless Night, that I was just talking about, I approach that very much as an outliner or a planner, or what George Martin calls a gardener kind of writer, where I have this very detailed, I had an outline by chapter, by scene, everything was planned out before I started even writing the book. But the last book I wrote, I approach more as what they call like a discovery writer, or a pantser, writing by the seat of your pants. Right. Which is very much like I just said, how I approach games, where I come up with my setting, my characters, and the situation that they're in, but I don't plan out how they're going to deal with it or what's going to happen next. And then I just kind of figure that out as I write it.
And I kind of know the answer to this because I've been listening to your podcast, but for those of people out there that haven't, how do those things vary? Like, and how successful do you think you were as a pantser versus a planner with endless amounts of planned material?
Yeah, well, okay. So first I'll say that I don't think there's a right and a wrong way. It's different things work for different people. But for me, I had a lot of fun with that first book that I outlined and planned, but I found after I got about halfway through it, I really started losing steam, and it got very hard to finish. In fact, I think the last, I don't know, quarter of the book took longer for me to write than the first half did. And at the time, I didn't understand why. It's only now that looking back that I think I understand why. And it was kind of like watching a movie that you've already seen like 5 or 6 times.
Right.
You already know everything that's going to happen. There's no surprises. There's no, oh, what's going to happen next? There's no sense of discovery.
Yeah.
And it for me, it became a slog.
Yeah.
Where this last book, it was a little more difficult in the beginning to get going because I didn't know where I was going. But again, a lot like a role-playing game, in the beginning, like nobody really knows their characters. It's kind of rough the first few sessions.
Yeah.
But then once you build up some history with the characters and they have some past experiences, like things kind of take on a life of their own. And there comes a point as a GM where you don't even really have to come up with stuff anymore. You're just reacting to what the players do. And that's how this last book was, where it just kind of took on its own life. And I found I had more fun with it as it went on, and I never got tired of it. I was having fun until the last page. So for me, that's the way to go going forward, but maybe not for everybody.
Yeah, of course. And I think like just like as a teacher, the thing that I try to encourage my students to do is to find out what works best for them, because just as you're saying, there are some people that a certain method or a certain approach works for, and someone else needs a very different approach, and they can both be very successful as long as they kind of listen to what their mind and their body are sort of telling them. So then,
and also you might want different approaches for different projects.
Right.
For instance, if I were to write a mystery, I would want to probably do more of the outlining stuff, because I would need to set up, the clues that are going to lead to the reveal of who the murderer is or whatever.
Yeah.
And it seems like that would be really hard to do in a discovery way. Almost impossible. I'm sure someone somewhere has done that.
Right.
But it would be much easier to kind of sketch that out ahead of time and then kind of write to fit it. So yeah.
Yeah, I've talked to quite a few writers, and it's very interesting, and it is what you're saying. Everybody seems to have a very different sort of approach to doing things. Like I've talked to some people that really like to outline, other people that like to do discovery, others that, take an altogether different approach to it. And again, I think you're really right there in like finding the approach that works best for you. Can we say then that with your third novel, have you taken an approach, or do you feel, did you take an approach that you feel worked better for you with your latest? So I believe your third novel is the one that you're currently working on and you're 3 drafts into, or?
That's my second. I
Oh,
haven't
okay.
started the third yet. I'm still
Okay, got
planning
it.
it.
Got it. Ah, I
Yeah.
see. How
Yeah.
then, let me ask you then, how are you going to sit down to write that third one? If if you with what you know on the first, what you know on the second, are you going to do a blend or a mix or?
I'm actually right now I'm planning to do it like I did the last one. So I really enjoy the discovery writing, especially as I was doing this, I realized how much it's like GMing, and it just like kind of the light went off and I'm like, duh, this is
Mhm.
what I should be doing. Because it's like the way I would describe it is like if you're running a role-playing game, maybe you start out with, the player characters are in a tavern, they hear a loud boom outside, they run out to the street to see, what's gonna happen or what happened, which I feel like you can count on them to do that at
Hmm.
least.
Yes,
And
you would hope.
someone was murdered by a fireball going off or whatever. And then it goes from there, who knows what they do next. Um, the player, I'd be like, well, what do you do? And the players would be like, oh, we want to talk to this person and ask them this and blah, 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 blah. And I would just kind of react to what they tell me they do and decide how the NPCs react to what they're doing, blah, 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 blah.
Hmm.
Well, I found that's how I approached writing this last book was, well, my main character does this. Well, then how does the other characters around her respond? How does that affect what's happening?
Right,
And it was exactly the same process as GMing, only I'm basically playing the player characters and the non-player characters all myself.
right.
But the kind of the decision making process was the same. And since I've had so many years of practice doing that, um, I'm going to keep doing it. So like for this next book, I have an idea of kind of the situation that's going to be kind of the big problem of the book, and I know who my main characters are that I'm going to use to do that, and I know my setting really well now. But as far as what's going to happen at this point, I have no idea.
But it's still like it's germinating right now.
Yeah,
It's marinating, it's
yeah,
germinating, it's doing all those things where it grows and takes on a life of its own. What prompted you to write? And ladies and gentlemen, I have a confession to make. Before every show, I always send a list of questions, and I sent a list of questions to Lex, and I sent him a list of questions, and I sent him with the name of his book before he changed the name to
yeah,
something else, and he wrote me a very polite email back to say, well, actually, I've changed the title. It's actually this now. And I said, oh, don't worry about it. I'll remember it. But the truth is, I forgot. I was going to call it Ominous Spin again. And
yeah.
me being me, uh, Mom, if you're watching, please don't throttle me. I've forgotten what the new title was. I was
Oh, that's all right. Well, now everyone can vote which they think is the better
that's
title.
that's right. Please vote.
So the original title was Ominous Spin. The new title is Critical Balance,
Okay, there we go.
which I just think it has much more ring to it.
What was the impetus for your newest book then? What was it that made you say, I want to sit down and I want to write this, as opposed to like I assume you're getting lots of other ideas in your head. Was there anything in particular, or?
Yeah. So, well, like I think I said, I've always been into space and astronomy and sci-fi and space exploration and all that. So during the time 13 years ago when I was writing this vampire novel, I was also watching, as I always do, lots of just anything any kind of educational programming on Discovery Channel or anywhere else about the solar system or outer space or the space program or SpaceX or anything remotely to do with any of that. If I see it, I watch it, I consume it. And, watching this stuff, sometimes I would see really cool ideas. Like, I mean, this isn't an idea I'm using in a book, but like the idea of a supermassive blue sun, that's way bigger than our sun. My D&D world of Primordia came from the idea of, wouldn't it be cool to have one of those supermassive blue suns and a supermassive red sun together in a binary system? And that's my D&D world that I came up with. But I guess I'm always a storyteller, always thinking about a story to write or a game to run. So I had this notebook where whenever I saw a cool idea, I would just write the idea in the notebook. And as these ideas started to accumulate, I thought, what would be cool is to make a science fiction setting that pulls in all my favorite of these ideas and then use that for a story. So 13 years ago, I started collecting these ideas. And one of the idea I had that was the kind of the seed for all of this, I still, somewhere I have a drawing I made 13 years ago. I had this idea of a cylinder, like almost a beer can shaped space station rotating for gravity, with a space elevator coming out of the bottom of it, going down to Earth, almost like on old timey TV shows, the kids would like take the 2 tin cans with the string between them to like talk to each other. It's like kind of like that. And I thought, oh, what a cool idea. And that was kind of the beginning. And so over 13 years, I was just collecting cool ideas. And then a couple years ago, I finally decided I would start writing this book. I've been talking about writing for over a decade. And I started doing more focused research into I don't even know what you would call it. In my podcast, I call it future Earth history, but kind of what scientists think we will do in what order as far as exploring the solar system and developing technology, and kind of figured out my own kind of timeline, and then figured out where in that point would be fun to tell a story. So, I came up with this setting, which the main setting of my book is one of these cylinder space stations that rotates for gravity. It's the size of a city. It's, I think, 8 kilometers in diameter, holds 750,000 people, about the size of Seattle. And it's in orbit of Earth on a space elevator. And that's like where the story takes place. So it's kind of funny because all of this was world building. Like, I had the setting completely realized before I even started thinking about who are my characters, what's the story going to be, which is funny because obviously this is something I'm into because I did so many episodes about world building for Game Master's Journey and building my D&D world, and I guess that's what excites me.
But I think it's to me it just sounds very much like a game master's sort of approach. Like whenever I sit down to build an adventure or an episode or whatever, I think about the things that the players did last. I sort of reconcile that against how I thought it was going to kind of go, and the evidence of what I know is actually happening in the background, and then I sort of see where the story is going to go from there. It really does sound like you're like I can just sort of see the similarities and the links that you were talking about before between prepping for a game versus writing for a novel.
Now that I think about it, I think this was started in high school when I was a freshman in high school. Because I remember when I first started playing D&D, here I am, I was running 2nd edition D&D by the seat of my pants. I didn't know what I was doing. And
I still don't know what I'm doing.
And I had friends
That's the secret,
who were playing in these D&D games that had been going on for years that I wasn't invited to. And of course, I dreamed about these awesome games that I wasn't playing in. And they were run by, juniors and seniors. And so I kind of had some weren't doing Dragonlance. They weren't doing Forgotten Realms like I was. I was running
Yeah.
in my own kind of version of the Forgotten Realms.
Yeah.
They had their own worlds, and I thought that was so cool. And so from the very beginning, kind of my idea of what is a dungeon master was, well, first the dungeon master creates his own world,
Yeah.
and that's where you're playing. That's what a real DM does. I'm
Yeah.
just a poser that uses Forgotten
But
Realms.
that's, that's the interesting thing. Like, I can't imagine running. I mean, I have been doing it and I've been training myself because I think it's a skill. But I've always run my own worlds, and I can't imagine, like, to me it takes so much work and effort to read through a book and learn about this world and then to convey it to the players in an accurate fashion and make sure that I'm not like you know contradicting something that happens later on or in another chapter or whatever. Like, I felt like,
Yeah,
I don't have time for that. I'm just gonna like make up the world as I'm like, this would be in like in high school, as I'm like, baking pizza for my pizza delivery job or whatever. And to me, it
yeah,
was a lot easier to do that.
yeah,
I think it's difficult actually to run modules and run settings for sure. And keep
yeah,
them fairly accurate, especially because I feel like I have players that would call me out on stuff and go,
yeah,
that's not
yeah,
what the tomb looked like in the book.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I totally agree. I mean, definitely it takes a lot of time and work to create your own world. Um, but once you do, like, it's in your head
Yeah.
in a way that Forgotten Realms or anything else never will be. I mean, you can study that, the campaign book or whatever for hours and hours and hours, and there's going to be stuff you just don't remember. But when it's something you came up with yourself, it seems like it's always there when you need it. And
Yeah.
if it's not, you know it well enough, you can just make something up that'll
Right.
fit.
Let me ask you this just to shift gears a little bit here. I kind of want to start tying this together. So we've talked about your role playing and we talked about your writing, but what I also want to know is, like, there's this third leg of the stool here, and that's your streaming and your podcasting, and maybe the compulsion you seem to have, like a lot of people that stream and do podcasts, to get it out there and show people and talk about not just what you're creating, but talk about how you create it and help other people create their stuff. Where did like what kind of prompted you? I look back at your YouTube channel, and I'm not really. I thought it goes back about 7 years, if I'm right, to like 2015, like the first stream of yours that I saw. Um, what way back in 2015? What was it that made you say, you know what, I want to try putting my voice out there?
Well, I've listened to podcasts since podcasts started. When I've always enjoyed them. I've listened to loads of writing podcasts and gaming podcasts. So for me, it was only natural at some point to be like, I want to make my own podcast. And my first podcast was actually about an MMO called Rift that I did with my wife. And then I think GM Intrusions was the second show I did. And it was just kind of, I wanted to do a podcast, and it's like, well, what can I talk about? And it was like, well, I've been GMing for a long time at this point, longer. And I think part of it was I was listening to other gaming podcasts, and I'm like, this guy is like GM'd a fraction of the time I
Right.
have. He's been GMing for 2 years and he's making a podcast or something. So that's kind of where the subject matter came from. And it was also something I felt like I could talk about every week, because I was gaming all the time. And as far as the streaming, I think it was just because I don't know. I just hear from listeners, who were just really curious about what my games were like. And I started becoming worried that people had this idea like I was this amazing GM, and I'm really not. I'd say I'm average. I'm no Matt Mercer by any stretch. So I think part of it was I just wanted people to see, like, hey, I'm not anything special, in the hopes to kind of get rid of that feeling of like, oh, well, I could never do what Lex does. He's like on this other level. And it's like, no, I'm really not. I'm just someone who's trying to get better, you know. Um, and it was just it wasn't a hard thing for me to do because
Mhm.
I was already playing online at that point anyway, to
Mm.
just, hit record.
Right.
And yeah, it just I don't know, it's just kind of a natural progression. I do know, it was kind of a joke at the time, but when I first started podcasting, I did have this thought in the back of my head of, someday I'm going to have some novels to sell, and it'd be nice to have an audience of people who
Right.
might be interested when that
Right.
day comes.
Right.
And here I am, over 10 years later, still podcasting and finally, getting to the point that I might have a novel to
Yes.
sell soon.
Was it? But so what's interesting about what you just said to me though is you were streaming games before you're giving before you were running before you were giving advice through like GM Intrusions and all of that. So you started by streaming the games and the actual plays?
No, I started with a podcast first.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. All right.
And then after a while, I started streaming. I'm
What
pretty sure Numenera was the first thing I streamed, but maybe it was D&D. I
is
don't
it
even
still
remember
up
now.
on YouTube? Because don't
I don't
think I
know.
can. I don't think I found it. I'd be very curious because I feel like if it had been up or if maybe I didn't look hard enough for it.
Well, I did take some stuff down because I have a really bad habit of starting campaigns and old stuff that I took down just because we never finished it and it was really
Right.
old.
Right.
And I didn't want people to watch it and then get excited and then it never goes anywhere.
And become like Annie Wilkes forcing you to end your last few
Yeah.
games.
Now Curse of Strahd I left up because it's just crazy
Yes.
popular. Even still, those are the most watched videos on my channel.
Oh wow.
And it's a published thing. So it's like, if you really want to know how that ends, you can go find someone
Right.
else running it.
Right.
And the most recent one, the Primordia one, we may still finish that. I would really like to. We're on a prolonged hiatus right now, but I still have all my notes, and I'd love to finish it
Well,
someday.
I know you were saying when you decided to end it, you were saying that it took a lot of effort and time for you to sit down, and I think you were making, or maybe you were talking about the audio versions of them, but I remember you were saying that the audio versions took a lot of editing. Because I was actually watching them on YouTube. Was there a difference between the uploaded audio and the YouTube video?
Yeah. So
Oh,
the YouTube, I was crazy. I was putting so much time into this. I would stream the actual game, which was just,
yeah,
unedited, just
yeah,
the whole thing.
right.
And then I would take the audio and I would edit that and put that in the podcast. And then at the very beginning, I was actually editing the video and putting edited
Oh,
videos up,
right,
and that was too much. So that went
right.
away first. And then I think I don't remember now, but I think I did more of the audio than the video, because I think there came a point where I stopped streaming to YouTube, but I kept recording and I kept putting it in the podcast as audio.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I'm pretty sure all the sessions we played are available, but
Mm.
in one format or another.
Or
But then
another
we
somewhere.
we took a break.
Right.
Yeah.
What can I ask you what some of the differences are you feel, or if there are differences between the games that you run for a stream and the games that you're running just on your own private time for your friends? Um, do you feel like you're bringing stuff from what you learned streaming into your private games, or do you feel like maybe your streamed games are maybe everybody's a little bit more on the ball, or maybe a little bit, I don't know, more into their characters or something? Is there a difference between those two?
Yeah, I really don't think there is. At least as far as the players, I never noticed any difference. I think they kind of forgot about it.
Mm,
Once we'd get going, they'd forget. Other than, sometimes when we streamed, we'd actually have people watch and be in the chat room. So they'd interact with people there. But really the only difference that I noticed was when I'm not streaming, I don't have to worry so much about what everyone's saying. I don't really care about profanity, but I was always on the lookout in case anyone said anything,
yeah,
racist or
yeah,
sexist or anything like that. Which luckily I don't think I ever had a player
Yeah.
say anything like that. I might have by accident.
Right.
Sometimes, even still in my private game, sometimes I say things that just come out wrong. I mean, I didn't mean it, but it
Yeah.
sounds like I'm saying something different than what I meant to say.
Yeah.
So it's kind of nice not to have to worry about that stuff because my players know that what I mean usually. But
Right.
yeah, that was always a concern when I was releasing stuff, especially during the editing. I was always on the lookout for anything that maybe I might want to cut out.
Right. Right. So then, can you tell me a little bit about? I'm kind of curious to know, has streaming that stuff and producing videos and audio and all of that, has it kind of taught you anything uh, about how to run a bit of game, or taught you maybe how to take things to the next level, or is it just more like something that's kind of completely different in and of itself, and gaming is gaming, and then gaming and streaming is something else?
Yeah, for me, I mean, it as far as a GM, it feels pretty much the same. I mean, there's some extra technical things to deal with the software to actually stream it,
Yeah,
but when I'm running the game, it's not really, I don't think any different. But I do think one thing that I did learn from streaming, and this is more just from playing with people online that I don't know, is, before I always was playing with friends from high school or college, and like we all know each other really well. We know, what will fly, what won't, what you
yeah,
can say, what you can't say. If someone has something that, I mean, back then we didn't have the word trigger, but
yeah,
if someone has something that triggers them, what that
yeah,
is. It doesn't need to be a discussion. It's just all kind of below the surface. But I did learn, playing with people online, how to, and this is a great thing to do in session 0, just be more kind of explicit about, hey guys, we're not going to go these certain places, or we're not going to do this certain kinds of content, or hey, is there anything that you don't want to see, and occasionally you might have a player that says,
yeah,
I don't really want anything to do with rape or child
yeah,
endangerment or
yeah,
whatever. um so just learning to think of that and realize that I don't know it, or I should be careful. So just, actually talking about that, where before it
yes,
was always kind of just unspoken.
yeah,
um and also that you can't rely on someone's body language necessarily. Like if you're in a room with someone and you're making them uncomfortable, and you're, paying attention, you'll probably notice that, especially if you know them well. But online, you may not, and so, just being more aware and more open, and telling the players, hey, look, feel free to private message me if anything's ever going
right,
down that you don't like. And I have once or twice just kind of had to just subtly kind of put an end to something, just kind of divert a
yep,
conversation another way,
yep.
just to be safer, because I know someone doesn't like what's going on. So
No, it's funny that you say those things because they're all, I feel, things that I've experienced as well in the last year or two of streaming. Like, I think I mentioned I a couple of years ago I attended the virtual Gen Con, and I was so used to playing with friends and people I knew, and my friends and I have kind of a style where I mean, I'm playing with people that I played with in high school, where we rib each other all the time,
right,
and what I discovered is that there are some people who and it's to their credit. Like they're different people that get something different out of the game. They don't want to hear a joke about how bad their role was, or they take it very seriously. And it's
right,
another way of sort of approaching the game. And whether I agree with that or disagree with that, it doesn't really matter. It's someone that's sort of in my game, and my job is to help make everybody feel included and feel like, we're having a good time, and sort of play to the things that they, you know, are they can have a good time with, I guess. Um,
Yeah.
so I do know what you and conversations that go on tangents and having to come up with a way to politely steer us away from that because I
Yeah.
don't like it or I can kind of see that maybe someone else doesn't like it.
Yeah.
Um, I think those are all really great observations.
And while we're on the topic, you just made me think of something
Mhm.
else. When you're in a room with people, the players also can police each other more. So if one player is maybe being a jerk or out of line in some way, they're going to get negative social cues from
Yeah.
all the other players that are kind of going to rein it in without anyone really having to do anything. But online, that doesn't happen. And I believe, is the GM's responsibility ultimately. I mean, everybody's responsible at the table, but ultimately the buck stops at the GM.
Yeah.
If something, I have occasionally had a player that is doing something that's bothering the other players, and it's not necessarily wrong or whatever, but it's just, one person is doing something that
Yeah.
everybody else doesn't like.
Yeah.
And so online, you have to talk to that person or maybe talk to the other players first, make sure you're seeing what you think you're seeing,
Yes.
and talk to the other person, where if it was in person, you might not have to do any of that. Or one of the players might stop up and be like, hey man, that's not cool.
Right. 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 Um,
Yeah.
well, Lex, I've kept you for quite a while here, but I
Yeah.
wanted to sort of
No
close
worries.
with I appreciate that. Don't say no worries to a teacher because I'll keep you another hour and a half. Um, let me kind of close with a kind of a bookend questions. Um, I kind of want to know, is there something that you're particularly proud of that you've accomplished? I mean, it doesn't have to necessarily be writing or role playing related. And looking to the future, what is something that you're looking forward to down the road? Something in your past, and then something down the road that you're looking forward to.
Well, hopefully this isn't a cop out, but they're both kind of the same thing. Um,
Oh, it's an
I'm,
efficiently woven answer. I like
yeah,
it.
I am really proud of the novel I just finished writing that I'm editing right now. It it was very ambitious, and at least from the feedback I've gotten so far, I think I accomplished what I was trying to accomplish. And I mean, there's a lot I'm proud of about it, but one of the things I'm really proud of is it's set about 200 years in the future and shows, I think, a future where this space station was built by 34 countries working together, and the people living there are from 34 countries living together, working together. Um, everybody speaks multiple languages. Everybody's uh, cultures are represented. It's not like, um, not to pick at another IP, but it's not like Star Trek, which seems very utopian, but also very homogenous.
Mm,
Like everybody's become one culture.
yeah.
This is much more like, for instance, my city, each country has a section of the city that is their district. So for instance, there's a Japanese part of the city where, um, they designed the buildings, they grow their food there, whatever crops that particular country would grow. All the food is made fresh. So it's kind of like in this one city, you can get authentic food from 34 different countries, plus all the fusions
Hmm.
that exist. Um, and Star Trek does this of showing like this kind of hopeful future, but to me, it's always been a little too utopian. It's
Hmm.
kind of hard to see our world in that
Yeah.
world, and like, how
Yeah.
do we get from where we are now to where they are?
Right.
Where what I've done, I feel like is a more relatable in that sense. And it's like, okay, yeah, this is way better than things are now, but I can kind of see this on the horizon. It's
Hmm.
not,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there is still disease. There could still be war. It's not, perfect,
Mm.
um, but it is better than where we are right now. And I'm pretty proud of it. And as far as the future, my intent, I've put a lot of time into the setting because I'm going to keep writing books in this setting. My intent is to write at least a novel, hopefully 2 per year, until I die. So, so I hope people like it because there's a lot more
Right.
coming.
There's more to read. Got it all planned out.
Yeah,
Well, well, Lex, thank you very much for coming on the program.
yeah,
I,
anytime.
I always end my shows just by letting everyone know that I choose my guests based on my own viewing selections, people that interest me, people I find to be very interesting, people that have done something interesting, written something interesting, streamed something interesting. You can completely check out. I think I got a lot of links to Lex's stuff in the
Yeah, it looks
description
like you got them
below.
all.
So I think I got them. So please do check them all out. Chances are there is something that suits your tastes or your interests down there, whether it be a stream, a podcast, something about writing, or just world building. Lex has got a lot of stuff, and there have been many nights I've gone to sleep listening to your soft voice in my ear as I listen to you talk about Dyson spheres
Yeah,
or things like that. So, to all of you that watched tonight or are watching in the future, thank you very much. I have been gone for about 3 months now. I've been a little bit slow on the uptake here. I've been moving. I've had a lot of things going on in my life. But I hope to get back. And Lex has graciously been, agreed to come on the program for my first like shaking the rust off off um, off the chassis interview. So I do appreciate that. So if any of you are interested in seeing more interviews, live actual plays, and a few surprises I have kind of planned for the rest of the year, please do like and subscribe. And if you can, maybe share. Sharing always helps me out, gets the word out. I'm not trying to become rich and famous. I don't really think it's possible to become rich and famous within the role-playing industry, maybe unless, like, I don't know, unless there's something I'm missing here. But I'm just trying to have some fun with my time and talk to people like Lex and introduce people like Lex to my viewers. So thank you all very much for tuning in. We will be back next week, believe it or not, with another cool interview and with some more streams. Everybody out there, have a great game and stay safe.